My name is Jennifer, and I've always been the daughter who, as you know, is the last person to be mentioned, if at all. I have long been accustomed to this unspoken order of things, to the fact that my existence is implied, but not significant. In our family, the role of the star has always belonged to Lisa, the eldest, successful, exemplary, loving wife, caring mother, and ideal daughter, whose life seemed to follow a carefully planned scenario in which there was no room for mistakes or deviations. I, on the other hand, remained on the sidelines, somewhere in the background, in the shadow cast by her achievements. Every Saturday, I drag myself to my parents' house for our traditional family dinner, although lately I've been finding more and more excuses to skip them. I'm tired of feeling like an outsider at these meetings, listening to the same stories, watching all the family members harmoniously play a long-rehearsed play, where there are no prescribed lines for me. Today was no different. I parked the car in front of their modest house in the suburbs, looking at the familiar facade with peeling paint on the porch railing, and took a deep breath before getting out. An ordinary house, an ordinary family, an ordinary Saturday, which will be spent in predictable conversations and dinner, which I will spend carefully restraining my irritation. As soon as I entered, I was greeted by a picture that was familiar to me down to the smallest detail. Lisa was already here, radiant and flawless as always. Her husband Tom was standing next to her, smiling absently, while their children, Emma and Jack, were rushing around the living room, squealing with delight. "Jennifer, you've finally made it," Mom said, barely looking up from straightening the flower arrangement on the table. No hugs. No real greeting. Just a statement of fact. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad," I nodded to my father, who was deep in conversation with Tom about some kind of sports game. "Have you heard about Lisa's parent-teacher meeting?" Mom immediately spoke up, enthusiastically switching into her usual mode of admiring daughter number one. Of course, I hadn't heard, and I wasn't particularly eager to find out, but it didn't matter. I wasn't being asked out of politeness. I was just being brought up to date on events that were already central to every conversation. The teacher said that Emma reads 2 grades above her age, and Jack's football coach thinks that next year he will be able to join the team that will participate in competitions. My mother continued proudly. Lisa, absorbing the praise like a sponge, did not fail to add, "Well, I use these special reading cards with Emma every night, and I take Jack to extra workouts 3 times a week." How wonderful. How predictable. I sat down quietly at the table. My existence, as usual, was barely noticed. No one asked about my week, my job, or my life. They never ask. They don't even know that 3 months ago I shut down a major project that saved our most important client from disaster. They don't know that I've received a $50,000 bonus, a promotion to senior project manager, and a raise that will dwarf Tom's high income and small change. "Pass the potatoes, Jennifer," Lisa said, and gave me that look, pitying, slightly condescending, full of quiet superiority. That look that said, "Poor Jennifer. Still alone. He's still filming. Still no one." I silently handed over the potatoes and took a sip of wine. Another one of my secrets. I asked my friend Rachel, an experienced real estate agent, to help me find an apartment to buy. I had enough savings for the down payment, and with my new salary, the mortgage won't be a problem. But why tell them about it? They'll either find a way to link it to Lisa's success, or they'll be stunned that I can afford it at all, and it'll be even worse. The rest of the dinner was held in a typical manner. More rave reviews about Lisa, more conversations about Tom's work, more stories about perfect children. I was silent, allowing their words to bypass me, without catching on, without leaving traces. Their opinions ceased to matter to me a long time ago. A month after that dinner, Rachel called me with exciting news. I found it. Her voice was trembling with excitement. "That's exactly what you need. Corner apartment with 2 bedrooms, a balcony, and a modern kitchen in a promising area." I looked at her that evening and immediately fell in love. Spacious, bright, with huge windows letting in sunlight, with a perfectly thought-out layout and a sense of freedom in every inch of space. I ran my hand over the marble countertop, feeling its cool smoothness, and exhaled. That's it, Rachel. I want to make a suggestion. 2 weeks later, I signed the mortgage documents, and at that moment something inside me changed. I no longer felt like just a person who had been playing a minor role in someone else's play all my life. I felt like the mistress of my own destiny, independent, strong, ready for new opportunities. I stood on the threshold of my new apartment, inhaling the smell of fresh renovation, stroking the cool marble countertop in the kitchen with my palm, and felt such pride, such a jubilant sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. It was my personal achievement, unrelated to my family, my sister, or their expectations. Just me, my efforts, my work, and my determination. I thought about telling my family about it, but I decided to wait until next Saturday's dinner. I wanted to share the good news at least once, see their reaction, show that I'm worth something too. After all, even if the successes of Lisa, her children, and her husband are considered family triumphs, doesn't mine deserve at least a minute of attention? However, when Saturday came, and I drove up to my parents' house, feeling impatience squeeze my chest, I immediately realized that something was wrong. There was a special buzz of excitement in the air. Lisa's children were running around the house even more excited than usual, and Mom and Dad were beaming as if they were about to announce something grand. "What's going on?" I asked, hanging my jacket on the usual hook by the door. Mom and Dad exchanged joyful glances, and Dad, after a theatrical pause, solemnly announced, "We have made a decision. The whole family is going on vacation to Hawaii." I blinked in surprise. Really? The words came out of my mouth before I realized what I was feeling. Really? Mom clapped her hands, her eyes shining with delight. "And you can come with us, of course." I thought about it. I hadn't been on vacation for 2 years, and there was finally a lull in my work, and there were no major projects ahead, so it was quite possible. I'd never gone on vacation with my family before, at least not at a conscious age, and maybe it was a chance to feel like a part of their world for a while. "Yes, I can do that," I said, noting how Mom's face instantly broke into a smile. "Wonderful." She put her hand on Dad's shoulder. "The whole family is together in Hawaii. It will be just perfect." Her sincere joy took me by surprise. She didn't usually feel that way about me. For a moment, I allowed myself to think that maybe this vacation would really change something in our relationship. "We're leaving in 2 weeks, Dad explained. "We have been planning this for a long time, but we wanted to make sure that everyone can take a vacation before announcing." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. A few minutes ago, I was going to tell them about my apartment, but now it seemed to me that the news about the family trip was too important to overshadow it with something else. Let this vacation be a chance for something new. My apartment will be waiting for me after I get back anyway. Dinner was held in a predictable manner. Mom and Dad discussed routes and attractions. Lisa told what things the children needed to take. Tom praised beaches and surfing, and I was not completely ignored, which was already a pleasant surprise, although most of the questions I was asked were more practical than personal. "Do you have enough vacation days?" my father asked. "Yes, I can take 2 weeks, I replied, finishing my wine. At that moment, it seemed to me that everything was going for the best, that maybe this vacation would really be something good for all of us. I didn't know that in just a week everything would change. The following Saturday, when I arrived for dinner, expecting the usual excited chatter about our upcoming trip, I was greeted by a completely different picture. There was a tense, heavy silence in the house, filled with muffled sighs and an uncommunicative presence. Lisa was sitting at the table, looking depressed and unhappy. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and the children were extremely quiet, sitting at the coffee table with their shoulders slumped. "What happened?" I asked, putting my purse on a chair. Mom and Dad exchanged worried glances before Lisa sighed heavily, sniffed, and spoke in a voice full of anguish. Tom and I had a serious argument. I frowned. Because of what? Lisa looked at me with a dramatic pause, then turned her gaze to her parents and slowly said, "He refuses to pay for my trip to Hawaii." There was silence in the room. What? Mom finally said, her face contorted with bewilderment. "He said that I'm not that tired, that I don't deserve a vacation because I sit at home and do nothing." Lisa made an offended grimace, her lower lip twitched. I bit my tongue not to say that Tom was right to some extent. A year ago, he hired a maid because Lisa complained that her homework gave her constant migraines, so cleaning the apartment was no longer her concern. The children spent most of the day at school or in class, and dinners were often ordered from restaurants. I could imagine Tom coming to the conclusion that his wife really was resting most of the time. "So you're not going?" I asked, trying to keep my expression neutral. Lisa shook her head. "Unless Tom changes his mind." "And he won't change his mind. He's so stubborn." Mom sighed and took Lisa's hand, as if comforting a child. "It's okay, honey," Dad said, patting Mom on the shoulder. "We are planning another family trip this year. It won't be our only chance." I looked at Lisa, at her depressed face, at her habit of making a big deal out of a molehill, and suddenly I felt a wave of irritation rise in me. A week ago, I thought that maybe this vacation would really change something in our communication. Now it became clear to me that this family scenario would never change. I quickly dried my hands with a towel, put the bottle of sunscreen on the bedside table and went to the door, not immediately understanding what could make someone so persistently knock on my room this morning. Maybe my parents decided it was time to go out, and not wanting to wait by the pool, they came for me, but as soon as I opened the door, I realized that I was mistaken. Mom was standing in the doorway, her face tense, her eyes wide open, and she was clutching her phone in her hand, as if she had just received some stunning news. "Jennifer," she said, sounding both worried and worried, "we need to talk urgently." I frowned, taking a step back, inviting her in. "What happened?" Mom entered the room and closed the door behind her, then turned to me as if trying to find the right words, but instead of explaining, she just handed me the phone. Lisa's name was flashing on the screen. I picked up the phone, and I barely had time to say, "Hello," when my sister's sobbing voice came from the other side. "Jennifer." Her voice was trembling, there was panic in it. "Tom, he wants a divorce." I froze, clutching the phone tighter in my hand, looking at my mother, who was nervously tugging at the hem of her light summer dress. "What?" That was all I could say. "He said he'd thought it over and didn't want this marriage anymore," Lisa continued, her voice occasionally breaking and her breathing becoming ragged. "He's already hired a lawyer. He said he wants me to move out of the house by the end of the month." I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what I just heard. Of course, Lisa and Tom's relationship wasn't perfect, but I never thought that he would take such a drastic step, especially considering that Lisa used to consider herself the center of his world. "Are you sure he's not just angry? Maybe he needs time to cool down?" I asked cautiously, although I already knew from her reaction that everything was serious. I tried to talk to him. "Stop it," she screamed. I begged him. "He said that the decision is final." I heard her sobbing on the other side of the phone, and I closed my eyes, feeling for a second not like a sister, but like a casual listener to someone else's tragedy. "And the children?" I asked quietly. "He said he wants joint custody, but how am I going to take care of them without money?" Her voice faltered again. "I've been a housewife all my life. I do not know how to work. What am I going to do, Jennifer?" I looked at my mom, who was standing with her arms folded, her lips pressed tightly together, and her expression resembled a mixture of helplessness and indignation. "Lisa, listen," I began, trying to speak as gently as possible. You need to calm down and think about what to do next. You know we'll all support you, but maybe you should talk to a lawyer. Figure out what your rights are. I don't have money for a lawyer. She screamed, starting to cry again. I bit my lip, realizing that this conversation was going to reach a dead end. Lisa didn't want advice. She wanted someone to come and fix the situation for her. You can come back to us, honey, Mom suddenly called out, taking the phone back. We will always be there. We will cope. I felt something tighten inside me. That was the whole point. Lisa could always come back. She could always count on support. She always remained the one who was taken care of, whereas I never gave myself such a luxury. Mom talked to Lisa for a few more minutes, calming her down, repeating that everything would be fine, that we would figure something out, and then she ended the conversation, took a deep breath and looked at me. We need to get back, she said. I blinked, not immediately understanding the meaning of her words. What? We have to go home, Jennifer. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Lisa is in terrible condition right now. She needs a family. I felt my shoulders tense and irritation boiling in my chest. Are you saying that we need to cancel our vacation? There was a note of indignation in my voice, and I didn't even try to hide it. Of course, Mom replied, as if that was the only possible option. She can't be alone in this state. But she's not alone, she has children, I objected. And Tom hasn't kicked her out of the house yet. We'll be back in a week. What will change in that time? Jennifer, Mom's voice became more stern. I understand that you don't want this, but the family must support each other in difficult times. I chuckled, shaking my head. Family? Or just Lisa? Mom frowned, but she didn't say anything, and that silence spoke louder than any words. I'm not going, I said firmly. What? You can do whatever you want, but I'm not going to cancel a vacation that you've planned yourself just because Lisa doesn't know how to handle her life. Mom's eyes widened. She looked like I just said something unthinkable, something so blasphemous that she didn't know how to react to it. Jennifer, her voice trembled. Are you really going to stay here knowing that your sister is going through this? I crossed my arms over my chest. Yes, Mother. I'll stay. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but then she just shook her head and headed for the exit. Whatever you want, she said over her shoulder. But I'm very disappointed in you. I watched her close the door behind her, and for a while I just sat in silence, feeling a wave of emotions wash over me. Anger, fatigue, disappointment, but not in myself, in her, in their predictable reaction, in the fact that their world always revolved around Lisa, and I remained somewhere on the sidelines, even now, even here, even on the other side of the world. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm sea air coming through the open door to the balcony, and suddenly realized that for the first time in a long time I had made a choice that was important to me. I stayed. And now, finally, it was just my decision. I felt anger constricting my chest, my pulse pounding in my temples, and my fingers involuntarily clenching into fists, but at the same time I was seized by an icy, piercing clarity. I saw everything as it really was, without illusions, without empty hopes. I was faced with people who had treated me as something secondary for years, people who, even here, on the other side of the world, could not put me at least on the same level as Lisa. She could appear without warning, make a scene, demand a place for herself in someone else's space, and it was taken for granted. I was just a comfortable figure whose comfort could be sacrificed for someone more important. I ran my tongue over my dry lips, trying to get a word out, but there were too many emotions fighting in me, too much accumulated resentment over the years. I turned my gaze to my mom, who was standing there with such an expression on her face, as if she didn't even doubt that I would just obediently obey. At the Pope, who seemed to have decided that there was no point in discussing this issue, because the decision had already been made. Lisa, who didn't even try to look guilty, on the contrary, there was something like relief in her eyes, as if she always knew that everything would end this way. So that's how it is? My voice sounded unexpectedly level, almost calm, but everything inside me was boiling. Jennifer, Mom began, but I held up my hand, silencing her. No, I want to hear from you so that there is no doubt. I slowly looked from one to the other. Do you really think I should just pack up and leave? That I don't have the right to stay in this room, which, by the way, I've already paid for? Mom sighed, looking at me as if I was a stubborn child who couldn't understand the obvious things. Lisa came here in a difficult emotional state, she said, emphasizing each word. She just experienced betrayal. Her husband is going to divorce her, and you can't sacrifice your comfort for a few days for your sister. Sacrifice comfort? I smiled bitterly, shaking my head. No, Mom, that's not what it's called. It's called giving up your boundaries for Lisa again, because, as always, she's more important. Jennifer, her father interjected, his voice low, firm, and tinged with irritation. No one is saying that you are not important, but be reasonable in the end. Reasonable? I slowly took a step closer to him, looking straight into his eyes. Reasonable? How reasonable were you when you decided to just put me in front of the fact? Or reasonable, like Lisa, when she first stole money from her husband, and then came here without thinking about where she would live? Lisa blushed, her cheeks flushed. I didn't steal. Stop it, she screamed. It was my money too. Really? I tilted my head to the side, crossing my arms over my chest. And if Tom came to the bank and just withdrew the entire amount from your joint account without warning, would you also say that it was his money? She pressed her lips together, turning away, and that was the answer for me. That's enough. There was a steely edge to Mom's voice. Jennifer, we're not going to discuss this. Pack your things. I looked at her mouth compressed into a thin line, at the expression on her face full of cold, absolute conviction that she was right, and I realized that this was really not a discussion for her. There was no other reality in her world except the one where I just agreed, as I always did. But this time I wasn't going to. No, I said calmly. There was silence. Mom blinked. What? I'm not going to move anywhere. I tilted my head to the side, watching the expressions on everyone's faces slowly change. This is my number. I paid for it. I live here. If it's so important to you that Lisa stays at this hotel, you'll have to find another place for her. Mom opened her mouth, but then snapped it shut. But we don't have another number. Lisa screamed. Then you should go to the front desk and discuss your options, I shrugged. You're being selfish. Mom snapped. Selfish? I took a step closer. And let's remember who decided to show up unannounced, without having a reserved room. Who stole money from her husband, and now demands that I adjust to her problems. She's your sister. Mom spat out angrily. And I'm your daughter. My voice rose for the first time. The room was plunged into deafening silence. Dad narrowed his eyes, Mom pursed her lips, Lisa looked at me as if I were a stranger to her. If you don't pack your things now, Mom said softly, almost threateningly, you risk ruining our relationship. I smiled. Slow, cold. What kind of relationship, Mom? She turned pale. I took a step back, picked up the suitcase she'd dropped at the door, dragged it back into the room, and closed the door in their faces. A few seconds later, there was a loud knock, then another. Jennifer. Mom shouted. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and did something I'd never done before. I blocked their numbers on my phone. The noise outside the door continued for a few more minutes, and then subsided. I didn't know if they went to the front desk to look for another place for Lisa or if they just left angry and disappointed, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't a victim of circumstances, Lisa's shadow, or a convenient younger daughter who could be manipulated. I felt free. I felt something break inside me, and then it turned into something more solid, clearer, as if I suddenly realized that it was time to stop being afraid and be weak. At that moment, I felt neither anger nor pain, just cold determination. Without words, without unnecessary movements, I picked up my purse, turning on my heel to get out of the situation, leaving my suitcase in the hallway, outside the door of my old room, where now there was no place for me. I heard my parents and Lisa start discussing sleep conditions, as if everything that had happened was a minor misunderstanding that could be easily fixed, as if I just had to go back and everything would be as before. But I couldn't be a part of their game anymore. My first instinct was to immediately book the next flight home, to return to a place where no one would use me like that, where I would not be forced to feel like a stranger again. But as soon as I got to the front desk, a better idea popped into my head, an idea that might have surprised me even a couple of months ago, but now seemed completely logical. I suddenly remembered the luxury penthouses that Kai had mentioned at check-in, when he told me that all the standard rooms had been booked. And now that I was faced with this choice, all this luxury seemed like the only right decision. Kai looked up as I approached, her friendly smile wavering slightly when she saw the expression on my face. I was sure she sensed the change, felt the determination in the air that literally emanated from me. "Miss Wilson, is everything okay?" she asked with slight concern, but I just nodded, not hiding the heaviness in my voice. "Not really," I replied, feeling everything inside me tense up, as if I was once again choosing the path that leads to my true independence. "Honestly, but I'm going to fix it." I briefly reminded her of the penthouses she mentioned, and as expected, her eyes widened slightly in surprise. She quickly dialed the number and named the price that would probably have made me faint 2 years ago. But now, standing in front of her, the moment she said the number, I didn't even blink. There was no doubt in my mind. I was ready. "I'll take one," I said without hesitation. "Your best option, please." Kai obviously hadn't expected this turn of events, but fortunately, she didn't ask. She quickly dialed the necessary numbers and handed me the keys. I followed the bellhop, who took my suitcase out of the hallway, taking it with him as if nothing had happened, and we headed for the elevator that led to the upper floors. When the elevator opened and the door to the penthouse swung open in front of me, I couldn't help but be surprised. I gasped. It wasn't just a room, it was something amazing. The penthouse was stunningly spacious, elegantly decorated, and had floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the endless ocean, which I couldn't help but fall in love with at first sight. The living room smoothly turned into a dining room, and behind it was a kitchen that looked like something out of a cooking show. And the bedroom itself is huge, with a bed that I could have drowned in, it was so big. I hugged her with my eyes and, without hesitation, headed for the bar. After opening a free bottle of champagne, I filled a glass and went out onto the terrace, enjoying the last rays of the sun, which was just setting over the horizon, painting the sky in bright orange and pink tones. I leaned against the railing, taking a sip of champagne, and at that moment I wanted nothing more than to enjoy this moment. I drank to the fact that now I know what I'm worth, and said it out loud, as if confirming it for myself. The night came quickly, but I slept like I hadn't slept in a long time, calmly and serenely. The soft sheets, which felt like clouds, seemed to lull me into this new world in which I could be myself, without pressure, without unnecessary expectations from others. In the morning, I woke up to a quiet call to my room, and soon breakfast was delivered to me, which I ate on my terrace, enjoying the silence and splendor of the surrounding world. After eating, I decided it was time to go to the beach, finally feel the sand under my feet, breathe in the sea air and clear my head. But as I crossed the lobby, my eyes accidentally met with my parents and Lisa, who were heading towards the entrance with their children. It was unthinkable. They had come to such a cheap solution that I felt a bitter smile forming inside me. Lisa noticed me first and, without hesitation, waved her hand, as if we had met by chance, as if this was an ordinary vacation, and not the consequences of the last night. "Jennifer, there you are," she said, and her voice was so welcoming that I could barely contain my sarcasm. I slowly approached them, trying to keep a neutral expression on my face, but Mom still couldn't help but ask, "Where did you spend the night last night?" Her smile was smug, but her voice contained a barely noticeable tension. Before I could answer, Kai appeared next to me. "Miss Wilson," her greeting was warm and formal. "I wanted to confirm your cabana reservation for this morning. As our VIP guest, we have booked the best location on the beach for you." My family froze, and their expressions changed from smug to confused as Kai continued without giving me time to respond. "Ms. Wilson is staying in our premier penthouse suite, so she has access to all of our exclusive amenities, including private dinners at our gourmet restaurant. Can your family join you for lunch today, Miss Wilson?" The expressions on my family's faces were priceless. Lisa's jaw actually dropped, Mom's eyes were bulging like a scared cat's, and Dad looked like he'd swallowed something sour and now didn't know what to do about it. However, I remained calm. "No," I said calmly, "they won't join me." The pause was heavy, almost palpable, and I felt my words, like a cold wind, tearing away the illusions in which they used to live. "Very well, enjoy breakfast at Rico," Kai added, as if drawing a line. I knew she was referring to this cheap diner where tourists on a tight budget dined. Kai, like me, wasn't going to stand on ceremony. Waving casually to my stunned family, I continued on my way to the beach, feeling lighter than I had in the last few years, as if everything that kept me here, as if everything that connected me to this place, had suddenly become completely unimportant. I walked along the beach, enjoying all the amenities that the hotel could offer, and never once thought about my family. I got a massage at the spa, relaxed in my personal cabana, where the attentive staff brought me tropical drinks, and swam in the ocean when the sun got too hot. Time flew by, and I was happy to be away from all these people, from all the expectations and demands they placed on me. That evening began quietly, but, as often happens, unexpectedly. I returned to my penthouse to take a shower and change for dinner, because the hotel's gourmet restaurant had a strict dress code, and I chose a simple but stylish black dress that would be perfect for such an event. I was just putting on my earrings when there was a knock on the door peephole. At first I thought it was just a random guest, but when I looked up, I saw my whole family, including the children, standing in the hallway with their luggage. I froze for a moment, not knowing how to react. Quickly scanning their faces, I seriously considered pretending that I wasn't there, just hiding, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door. But I didn't let them come in right away. I blocked the passage with my body, not giving them the opportunity to just enter my world. "What do you want?" I asked, not waiting for them to say something. My mother, as always, did not stand on ceremony and pushed past me, ignoring my displeasure. Her father followed her, then Lisa and the children. They were standing in my living room, staring at the luxurious surroundings, clearly not expecting such a reception. Mom seemed to have woken up from her daze and was the first to say with restraint, "Jennifer, we have decided that we will stay here with you until the end of the vacation." I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" I repeated, not believing my ears. "We checked out of our rooms," Dad explained, as if it was a perfectly reasonable decision. Lisa, without taking her eyes off my huge sofa, continued, "We're all going to stay here." She added this as if she had already measured the sofa for a sleeping place. I felt irritation begin to rise in me, and even at that moment I realized that I couldn't let them do that. "There's more than enough room," Lisa said confidently, as if that was enough for me to agree. I laughed, trying to process everything that was happening. I couldn't believe I was back in that nightmare. "No," I said when I could speak again, "you're not staying here. This is my room, which I'm paying for, and you're not welcome in it." Lisa took a step forward, her voice taking on that familiar grumpy tone she used when she needed something. "Come on, Jennifer, don't be selfish. Look at all this space. We're a family, she said, shifting the responsibility onto me, as always. I felt a surge of rage. I couldn't stand this insolence, this injustice any longer. Family? I repeated, feeling my anger begin to build. A family doesn't kick someone out of their room. A family doesn't make someone else's vacation their problem. I felt the words that I couldn't say before start to come out. Your family asks about your life and celebrates your successes, rather than taking away everything you hold dear. Lisa snapped, we've already checked out of our rooms. It sounded like her excuse, as if her dissatisfaction and desire to manipulate were completely justified. I repeated the words of my father that I had said earlier, this is your problem. Now, please leave before I call security. But they didn't move. Instead, a loud argument began, in which everyone tried to shout over each other. Lisa's voice, as always, rose above the others, and I could hear her irritated, aggressive tone. You're being incredibly selfish right now. I have children. My gaze stopped on her face, and I suddenly realized that none of this mattered. I wasn't the one who had to make excuses. I took the phone, called security, and asked them to come and intervene. I wasn't going to tolerate this aggression. A few minutes later, security was already standing in the hallway, ready to escort these unwanted guests out, but I knew that for my family it was all just a new game. When I hung up, my family's expression changed from legitimate anger to panic. Mom was the first to break the silence, her face distorted. She clearly did not believe what was happening. You can't be serious, she said, saying the words as if she were trying to convince herself. Without moving, I answered briefly but firmly, yes, I'm serious. Lisa stood next to him, no longer hiding her irritation, and, unable to stand the pause, asked in a cracked voice, but where are we going? She asked, sounding not only displeased, but also confused, the very moment when a person realizes that his habitual reality has begun to crumble. I could have said something snide, but I decided not to. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and I turned around, already knowing exactly what to expect. The hotel security arrived quickly. I opened the door and saw Kerr and two security personnel standing in the hallway, their faces neutral, but it was clear in their eyes that they were waiting for my order. Is there a problem, Miss Wilson? Kerr asked with that same cold politeness that seemed even harsher than simple directness in such situations. I wasn't going to waste time explaining, so I just replied, yes, these people need to leave my room, but they refuse. Kerr looked at my family carefully, and without looking away, she said, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to come with me. My mother, having already realized that the situation was getting out of control, desperately exclaimed, wait, can we get our old plates back? Kai sympathetically shook her head, but her voice remained stern and professional. I'm sorry, but as I explained earlier, when you checked out, these plates they have already been handed over to new guests, now they are occupied. My parents exchanged a quick glance, but they didn't say another word, because Kai's face was determined, and she didn't need to repeat her words. When they followed Kai, my mother turned to me and, no longer able to hide her irritation, said, It's not over yet, Jennifer. I didn't answer. Closing the door behind them, I went out onto my terrace, feeling how easy it was to breathe in this world where there was no more room for other people's ambitions. My phone vibrated with text messages from my mother. I looked at the screen and read them, not feeling the slightest sympathy for those who wrote them. We're in a Palm budget motel, one room for all 5 of us, the bathroom smells musty. I hope you're happy. The text was written with a clear hint of resentment, but I didn't feel guilty. Then there was another message from Lisa. The children are crying because their beds are dirty. How can you do this to them? I turned off my phone and put it aside. These attempts to manipulate me might have worked once, but they don't anymore. I finally realized that I no longer have to prove anything to anyone and that I am the only person I am responsible for. My inner world finally calmed down. I was responsible only for myself, and for the first time in my life, I put myself first. The rest of my vacation in Hawaii was blissful. I intentionally kept my phone turned off most of the time, checking it only once a day to make sure there wasn't any real emergency, but there wasn't. The angry messages from my family continued for 2 days, but then suddenly stopped. I didn't even notice how they disappeared, how they subsided, as if by themselves. Later, I found out why. A hotel employee informed me that my family checked out of the budget motel and flew back to the mainland early. My mother left me a message at the front desk, which was brief and completely emotionless. "We're going home. I hope you're happy." I was more than happy, and to be honest, this vacation was a real release for me. I spent the rest of my days swimming in the ocean, walking along the waterfall, taking a sunset cruise, generally doing whatever I want, without the burden of expectations and condemnation from my family. I felt like a different person, lighter, happier, and freer, as if I had finally freed myself from everything that was holding me back from breathing. As my plane took off, I watched Hawaii shrink beneath me. I didn't feel sad, but I was determined. This vacation was a turning point in my life. A return to the way it was before was not possible. When I landed, I immediately took a taxi straight to my new apartment. It was still sparsely furnished, but it was mine, and that was enough. I walked from room to room, making mental notes about what else I needed to buy. I was going to go to the store tomorrow at a real dining table, maybe find some art for the walls. I had time to make this place truly mine, and I didn't feel the slightest regret for what I had left behind. At that moment, I realized that every step, every decision I had made in recent weeks, was the right one for me. I no longer sought approval from others. 2 weeks after returning from Hawaii, I finally settled into my new apartment and returned to work. I plunged into a new project with my head, leaving myself no time to reflect on the past. The confidence I gained by speaking out against my family gave me the strength and desire to participate more actively in work meetings and take on additional responsibilities. I felt something change in me. This struggle for myself, for my boundaries, led me to a new perception of my own strength and capabilities. I became more determined, and it was noticed at work. I grew up not only as a specialist, but also as a person, and I loved it. However, one afternoon, when I was sitting at my computer working on another report, my phone rang. I immediately saw that it was my mother's number. Of course, I was waiting for this call. At some point I realized that it was inevitable, but I still felt a tremor of anxiety when I answered. "Hi, Jennifer," Mom began with her usual wariness in her voice. "Where are you?" "We went to your old apartment and were told that you no longer live there." "That's right," I replied calmly. "I moved out." There was a pause. I didn't know what to say to her. I didn't want to get into these empty conversations again. I didn't want to return to that toxic circle from which I had barely escaped. But it seemed like Mom was ready for some new attempt after all. After a pause, her voice suddenly became soft and even curious, as if she was carefully choosing her words, trying to get back into my life. "Where have you moved to? May we have your new address? I think it's time for us all to talk and make up." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to smooth out the storm of emotions, and answered without hiding my indifference. "I bought my own place." There was stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by muffled, surprised exclamations. "Have you bought an apartment?" Mom finally said, unable to hide her surprise. "When? How?" "About 2 months ago," I said, after I got a promotion and a bonus for a major project I completed last year. There was a hint of indignation in my mother's voice, as if she thought I hadn't told her something. "Why didn't you tell us?" I felt my irritation flare up inside me again, but I didn't allow myself to respond with resentment. I was able to respond calmly again, without heat, without anger. "When would I tell you?" I asked quietly. "During all those family dinners where you only talked about Lisa?" Or maybe during the vacation when you kicked me out of my own hotel room? Silence again. It's a long one. This time, it seemed even heavier than the previous one. I could hear my mom trying to find the words, but they wouldn't come. I didn't expect her to say anything. In the end, she said, "We should meet and talk about it. The family should not move away." I was about to hang up, but Mom continued, "What's your address? We're coming this weekend." I took a deep breath, gathering my strength, and said decisively, "No, Mom. I won't give you my address, and I don't want to meet right now. I need space from all of you. Jennifer." Her voice turned sharply cold. "We are your family. You can't just interrupt us." "Actually, I can," I said, feeling all the intense fear drain out of me. "Until you understand why your behavior was unacceptable, that's exactly what I'm going to do." I didn't let her answer and hung up, feeling my heart continue to pound, but the determination inside was absolutely firm. I made my choice, and despite all the feelings that overwhelmed me, I did not allow myself to waver. Over the next few months, my family tried their best to reconnect. They called, texted, and even sent emails to my work address. Sometimes the letters were angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes manipulative. I read them casually, not giving myself even the slightest chance to get involved in these old games. I deleted most of the messages without reading them to the end. Through mutual friends, I found out that Lisa and Tom have serious problems in their marriage, and the incident in Hawaii was the last straw, after which they are moving towards divorce. I felt a momentary flash of sympathy for the children, but I immediately reminded myself that Lisa's choice was not my responsibility. And although this fact did not leave me completely indifferent, I knew that I had my own ways and solutions. Meanwhile, I continued to do well at work. I was promoted again, and I managed to make new friends at the travel club. I even started dating a man I met at one of the work conferences. My apartment was now fully furnished, and I enjoyed every corner of the space, which became my refuge, my world, where there was no one who could make me feel uncomfortable or guilty. Sometimes I thought about reconciling with my family. Maybe someday, if they show sincere remorse and are willing to change themselves, I'll let them come back into my life. But I didn't hold my breath and didn't put my life on hold, waiting for it to happen. My life was mine now, and I decided for myself who and when I should be with.